I don't even know if this YouTube situation gonna work, but we're gonna try it out and see exactly what's going on here. All right. If you're on it's saying nobody here. Okay. Well, whatever. Anyways, I have so much that I want to talk about today. First of all, hello everyone. My name is DaynaLN Knuckles, also known as the People's Oracle. You may also know me as the Sidereal Astrologer. Today we're here to talk about the reading for the new moon in Sidereal Aries, which is also a solar eclipse. Listen, I got my notebook, I got stuff I want to read, I got stuff I want to say, I got stuff I want to talk about, but the first thing that we're going to do is we're going to turn to the back of this 2022 Sidereal Astrology Guide to the month of April, because the new moon was yesterday, April 30th, 2022, taking back the power to define blank for myself. Now, if you're watching on YouTube or you're viewing this stream at some other point, you'll see the title is Realizing, Reclaiming, Redefining, and Renaming. This is actually taken from my most recent blog post on Saturn in Sidereal Aquarius, which I'm going to pull up here real quick just to read you all the quote that the name of my word for the day comes from. If you're on YouTube, let me know how this stream is going for y'all. Ooh, it says excellent condition. On today, we're going to bless God for the tech savviness of myself. Okay, so towards the end of this post on the peoplesoracle.com, talking about the newest transit, which is Saturn in Sidereal Aquarius, it says, self-determination as the gift of Sidereal Aquarius is the process of right to and survival-based need to recognize and name the gazes you have internalized, realize that those gazes are not your authentic self, reclaim the right to see yourself through your own eyes and imagination, reimagine, redefine, and rename oneself. Self-determination is the difference between identifying with who and what has power over us and identifying with a real imagined self that exists independent of who and what has power over us. All right, I'm talking about Aquarius because at this present eclipse, which is a new moon in Sidereal Aries, which means the sun and moon both occupy Sidereal Aries, it means that they do this near the place where the sun, moon, and earth's orbit all kind of line up, right? We call this eclipse the lunar nodes, right? Now, one of the most important things is, where is the ruler of an eclipse? When we're talking about Aries, we are talking about power, we are talking about control, we are talking about control over ourselves, acting in accordance with our own abilities. It's a very subjective sense of, I can do this, so I shall. Of course, that's always in the context of our socio-material consequences, right? What are the consequences for acting in accordance with my own abilities? Really embodying my subjective awareness of what I am capable of. What does society have to say about that? And I say socio-material consequences because there really is no separation between like real material consequences and social consequences. These are the same. The structure of our society and the way that we deal with power actually defines and determines how we experience our material reality. If you are disabled, that identity means in capitalism, whiteness, and patriarchy that you You are the infantry. You are at the front line of dealing with any pathogen or illness, right? And so the socio-material consequences of reality has more to do with how society defines, names, and identifies you in terms of your body and what your body is capable of. Of course, we're talking about how much labor, right, you can offer up to our capitalist robber baron overlords, right? So this is Aries, right? But when we bring in this fact that Mars is in Sidereal Aquarius, Saturn is fresh in Sidereal Aquarius, it's actually really, really simple and straightforward. What is going to define how I identify and experience what I'm capable of? How am I seeing myself? Who am I to myself? Close your eyes and see yourself in your own imagination, right? Now, I'm gonna pause here and I'm gonna switch lanes a little bit, still going in the same direction, still following the same GPS directions. We just switching lanes a little bit because we gotta bring another piece in here. So this past weekend, I watched a documentary called, what is it called? I don't even remember what it was called, but it was about this cult called Heaven's Gate. Okay? You can find it, look it up. It's wild, it's crazy kids. Okay? So this, if I could find it, this whole thing of a cult, right? Like, what even is that? Obviously, the word culture, inculcate, all of these words, acculturate, are all a part of the same word. But seriously? Look, this thing done went behind a paywall. Oh, here it is. Okay. So one of the things that was going on in this documentary is that they spent a lot of time interviewing and talking to people who are supposed to be like experts on cults. There was one guy who was called like a cult intervention specialist, right? And this is somebody who didn't necessarily try to convince people to leave a cult, but to really try to get them to think on their own, right? To think independently of a cult. So I wanted to know, like what do these people define as a cult? And I'm just gonna read this to y'all. This is from an article on The Guardian. Psychiatrist Robert J. Lifton, he wrote a paper titled Cult Formation in the Early 1980s. And I'm just gonna read this and then I'm gonna bring it all back together, okay? A charismatic leader who increasingly becomes an object of worship as the general principles that may have originally sustained the group lose power. A process of indoctrination or education is in use that can be seen as coercive, persuasion, or thought reform. Economic, sexual, and other exploitation of group members by the leader and the ruling coterie. Okay? Now, this to me is really making something so plain to me. I'm gonna reread this, and wherever I see the leader, the word leader, I'm gonna replace it with some other words. A charismatic whiteness that increasingly becomes the object of worship. A charismatic capitalism that increasingly becomes the object of worship. A process of indoctrination or education that can be seen as coercive persuasion or thought reform. A charismatic gender binary that increasingly becomes an object of worship, a charismatic anti-Blackness that increasingly becomes an object of worship. Now, if I am looking at this world through the lens of whiteness, the lens of capitalism, the lens of patriarchy, surely anything that does not indoctrinate, educate, reinforce, coercively persuade people to surrender to capitalism, to surrender to patriarchy, and to surrender to whiteness, anti-Blackness, transphobia, homophobia, anything other than that is going to be seen as a cult. So who gets to decide even what a cult is? Who gets to decide what a cult is? Because as far as I'm concerned, number 3 here, this will open up. Number 3 here, economic, sexual, and other exploitation of group members by the leader and the ruling coterie. Are you being economically exploited? Have you been sexually exploited by men or other adult figures, because we live in an authoritarian society, right? Have you been exploited by capitalism? Have you been sexually coerced? I mean, absolute authoritarianism without meaningful accountability. No tolerance for questions or critical inquiry. Merely questioning capitalism makes you a communist. Merely questioning patriarchy makes you anti-science, because it's science that says that people who have penises are innately stronger and more physically powerful than anyone else who does not have a penis. And because people who have penises are innately stronger and physically more powerful than people who don't have penises, then they are entitled to have power over everyone else. Question it. What does that make you? No meaningful financial disclosure regarding budget or expenses. Where are your tax dollars going? Do you have health care? Is your water clean and accessible? What about the air quality? Is it safe for you to leave your home? Unreasonable fear about the outside world, such as impending catastrophe, evil conspiracies, and persecutions. What happens when you dare to even think or imagine, and God forbid, articulate the possibility of living in a non-capitalist world? Former members often relate the same stories of abuse and reflect a similar pattern of grievance. What happens when you wake up to the reality of the violence of whiteness? There is no legitimate reason to leave. Former followers are always wrong in leaving negative or even evil. What happens when you dare to imagine a self that is not surrendering, subservient, and subjugated to and by whiteness, to and by capitalism? Tell me we're not all in a cult of individuality. Tell me we are not in a cult of whiteness. I don't care what your skin color is. Tell me you are not in a cult. Tell me you are not in a cult of capitalism. Tell me. What happens should you dare even imagine that you have the dignity of housing, food, safe water, and air without selling your labor and your body? What happens should you dare imagine that you should not send your children to school to be indoctrinated as wage slavers? What happens? What happens when you dare to imagine a reality that is not the one we live in? Oh, you're too idealistic. That's a utopia. Human nature says. Don't tell me what human nature says. I know for a fact that every single one of us has been indoctrinated into the cult of gender. So obsessive, they've created machines to look inside the body of a pregnant person just to see what the genitals are before that thing comes out. Just so they can already start in their mind planning how they're going to socially condition, indoctrinate, and force this unborn being into a gender role that has been predefined without even actually getting to know the person and what they think of themselves and who they think they are. Tell me we're not in a cult. Tell me. So we all talking about, oh, I would never be in a cult. You don't understand. Cults are enforced with violence, emotional violence. Cults are enforced with threatening to make you houseless and homeless. Cults are enforced by saying, if you don't do this, you are not going to eat. Cults are enforced by isolation and imprisonment. What happens when you dare to imagine? What happens when you articulate your lived reality that the physical body that you have is a complete contradiction to the reality of who you are and how you experience yourself? What happens when the genitals you have, according to this society, don't match your sexuality? They're sending you to conversion camps. Tell me heteronormativity and heterosexuality isn't a cult. Should you even dare to imagine yourself? Should you dare articulate and embody the true desire that you have? They are going to violently try to rid you of it. Tell me we're not in a cult. Tell me this whole thing is not in a cult. Convince me, because I'm not gonna believe you. Why can't I, as a human being, see myself through my own eyes? Decide what name I shall answer to. Decide for myself who I shall be. Why does it have to be assigned to me? Why do you, through your eyes and your brainwashing and indoctrination, get to tell me who I am? Why? Why do you get to write laws? Why? Why do you get to write laws to police my internal organs? Tell me we are not in a cult. So this is the work of self-determination, realizing that the gazes you have internalized, meaning when you look out of your own eyeballs, the stories and the judgments that inform, define, and determine what you see are not your own. They have been violently indoctrinated in you. You look at people and your first thought, is this a boy or a girl? Your first thought when you look at another human is, what are the genitals inside their pants? Your first thought. Some of you even come out and say it. Are you a boy or a girl? Some of you even come out and say, why is that your first thought? Why? Why is the very first thought that you have about someone's genitals? Don't lie to me. Do not lie to me. You find any person even remotely attractive, you gotta self-police your own desire because if they have the wrong genitals? Come on now. Realizing, reclaiming, redefining, renaming, taking back the power to define reality for myself. To define myself for myself. Not to define you. Not to tell you who you are. No, to have power over myself. When I close my eyes and I conjure up the image of myself that is the most authentic self, I'm not thinking about anybody else's judgment. You have a right to do that. You have a right to do that. Right now, we're seeing build the largest labor movement in history. Why? Because I have a right as a human to decide for myself what I'm willing to do or not do in order to be housed and fed. Why does somebody else have the power over my housing? Why does somebody else have the power over the food I eat? Why? As a worker, I have the right, the God-given obligation to see myself through my own eyes. Because at the end of the day, anytime we do not reclaim our own power, the only thing that is holding us back is because we want to have power over someone else. White folks have the hardest time doing the work of self-determination because it requires them to give up their power over other people. Capitalists ain't never gonna see themselves through their own eyes because they ain't never gonna give up that power. That's why we gotta take it back. Patriarchy? A man engaged deeply in the work of self-determination, of realizing that the self they've been identifying with all along was one that they were coerced into embodying. Their whole reality fall apart. Everything is a lie. Yes, it absolutely is. But they're not going to do it. Why? Because it required them to give up the power they have over everyone else. And when I said this before, and I'm gonna say it again, you cannot have both. You cannot have power over yourself and power over others. Whatever it is that's got your panties in a bunch, making you think that you have to dominate others, that you have to use your eyeballs to determine who somebody else is, what they have the right to do, whether they have the right to move freely or not. The fact that you prioritize some eyes that's not even yours. You can't even sit down and rest for fear that you are seen as lazy. So of course, when you see someone who does not have the ability to get up and sell their labor, you are going to judge them. You're going to say, you don't have a right to housing. You don't have a right to food. You don't have a right to that. It ain't even about them. It's about the fact that you're mad that you have to sell your labor in order to survive. You're about the fact that you live in terror every single day. Should something happen to you and you lose the use of your limbs, you lose the use of your conscious mind, you're gonna be out there on that street with them. So instead of coming into solidarity with the people who are suffering under the same oppressive cult as you dissociate from the reality of the terror that you live in every day, because it will never be me until it is. Until it is. How many times have we seen it? Some man get into a position of power and their entire political doctrine, everything that they use their power for is to control LGBTQ people, only come to find out that man was afraid of being found out as gay himself. He has no power over the reality of his gayness. And so this was real interesting in this Heaven's Gate cult. The leader of this cult was the son of a prominent Presbyterian minister. He was gay though. He really wanted to be like his daddy. He wanted to be that powerful leader. He wanted to be the leader in the community. He wanted to be a minister. But he was gay. He hated himself. Later on in the documentary, spoiler alert, he is so disgusted by his own body. He has internalized homophobia so much that he castrates himself. And all of his followers, not all of them, but a large amount of them joined along and decided to castrate themselves too. Do you see your capitalist overlords? Do you see them indoctrinating their children at the most successful indoctrination institutions? Do you see them going to the most successful indoctrination institutions called colleges and universities? Will you be like them? Will you castrate yourself of the freedom to define yourself for yourself? Or shall you follow in the footsteps of your corporate overlords? Raise your children like they raise their children. Drive the cars they drive. Wear the clothes they wear. Defend them on your social media platforms, hoping that they'll see you and give you a taste of their power, because you too would like to have some power at the expense of somebody else's exploitation and suffering. Isn't that what you dream about? Isn't your dream of luxury to be able to be so comfortable at the expense of somebody else's exploitation? Whose body and labor is going to pay? Somebody's body and labor is going to pay. So while you're laying down in your luxury and ease, who's living the hard life? Do you care? Yes, you've worked hard. Why? What happens if you don't? So you don't ever want to think about that. You don't want to think about what happens when you don't. What happens when you don't conform to the expectations of capitalism? What happens when you don't conform to the expectations of whiteness? Economic, sexual, and other exploitation by group members of whiteness, group members of patriarchy, group members of capitalism. The destructiveness of groups called cults varies by degrees, from labor violations, child abuse, medical neglect, in some extreme and isolated situations, calls for violence or mass suicide. Tell me right now that we are not engaging in mass suicide by COVID. Tell me we have not chosen to preserve the cult of capitalism over ourselves. There is no number too large we're willing to sacrifice to our gods. Tell me. I'm speaking with an urgency because the moment is incredibly urgent. Tell me every single person, including you who are watching and including you who are watching, that is walking around without a mask, attending large groups unmaskless in poorly ventilated areas, going to concerts maskless. Tell me you have not been indoctrinated into a cult that does not care if you live or die. Tell me. To the point, should you decide to save your own life by wearing a mask, you might be accosted. You might be verbally assaulted. Tell me we're not living in a cult. And I know this because when I get on my social media and I'm watching my stories and I'm seeing everybody's posts, and it's like, wait a minute, aren't we still in a pandemic? Isn't COVID still virulent? Aren't people still dying? Isn't there millions of people globally and increasing exponentially each day who are suffering from the chronic phase of COVID? They may have survived the acute infection, Just like some folks survive the acute infection of HIV, and for many, it goes on to develop into AIDS, which simply means acquired immune deficiency syndrome. You can go do the research yourself. You can go do the research yourself. You don't have to believe me about what this disease is doing to us. You don't have to believe me. But tell me we're not in a cult. Is it because you look around and everyone else is doing it? Is it because you look around and see no one else is wearing a mask? Is it because you look around and see that nobody else gives a damn about the children? Nobody else gives a damn about disabled people, so neither shall I. You think that you would never join a cult. I saw it. You said it. You said, oh no, I'm a critical thinker. You can't think for yourself. You think for capitalism. You can't think for yourself. You're thinking about how you can be more acceptable to whiteness. Why? Because your life and survival depend on it. A cult is not being wooed into some religious belief system. It is having the power of life and death held over you. And when you have the power of life and death held over you, you internalize the gaze of those who hold that power, and that becomes the self you identify with. And so at this new moon, solar eclipse in Sidereal Aries, realizing, reclaiming, redefining, and renaming yourself is a matter of life and death. And if you don't start today, I hope you start tomorrow. Let's move on and pull some tarot cards. I've got cards. I've got the Afro Tarot, one by Jessi, Jumanji. I've been wanting to get this off my chest, y'all. I've been wanting to get this off my chest. Cause it's like, ain't no way. Ain't no way I'm crazy for staying in my house. Ain't no way. I watched the millions of people die. Ain't no way you're not gonna make me forget. I don't care what everybody else is doing. Look up the ASCH, conformity experiment. They showed this in the Heaven's Gate documentary. In the conformity experiment, they sit 6 people at a table. 5 people are in on the experiment, 1 is not. The person who's leading the experiment puts a series of boards up, and there's 1 line and then there's 3 lines to the right. Your job is to decide which line is the same length as the 1 line on the left. At the beginning, the 5 people all choose the right line, and so do you. After a few rounds, though, in unison, all of the 5 people who are in on the experiment choose the wrong line. 60% of the people who participated in this experiment conformed to the choosing of the wrong line. 60%. I think that that's an excellent estimation of the percentage of people who are roaming freely in the petri dish called the world, the petri dish of COVID. 30% of people, right, are skeptical, able to maintain individuality of their own mind, able to step back from their own need to be accepted and conform to survive and perceive that. Now, I know I'm looking at this through my own eyes, and that what they're saying isn't right. Are you going to assume that you're wrong? This is what we do with everything, though. Change those lines to gender. Everybody's looking at me and treating me like I'm a girl, so I must be. Everyone is looking at me and treating me like I'm male, so I must be. There must be something wrong with my brain that I am perceiving and experiencing myself differently from the way that capitalism treats me. Now, on the inside, I feel like it is immoral and unjust to sell my labor in exchange for food and housing. But everyone else around me is selling their labor for food and housing. I might be imprisoned, denied food and medical care if I don't do it. So, what am I gonna do? What are you gonna do? Let's see what these cards say. I'm getting worked up. I've been worked up. I was worked up when I woke up this morning, worked up when I went to bed last night. I'm so tired of this foolishness, y'all. I'm so tired of sitting here wondering, have I lost my mind? Is everyone in on some secret that I do not know? Has there been some secret meeting that did not include me that makes me not aware of reality? We've got the fool. Forgetting that which is behind me, I press toward the mark of the high calling. The high calling is to realize that the way that you see when you look in the mirror, what do you see? When you look in the mirror, what's the body part your eyes go to first? When you look in the mirror, which part of your physical person do you gravitate towards? Are you displeased by it? Do you wish it was more of this and less of that? When you are in public and aware that you are visible to other people, which part of yourself do you stuff down and hide? In a dissociative state of terror, should they discover this about me, what will they think? What do they think? When you imagine love, intimacy, which part of yourself are you the most afraid of revealing to another? Why? Who told you that body part was too little of this or too much of that? Who told you that this characteristic or quality of yourself should not be seen by anyone else? Who told you that? You didn't decide that on your own. You didn't wake up one morning and just for fun decide that you should have different body parts than the ones that you have. That your ass should look different, your lips should be this, your hair should be that. You should be a little taller, a little shorter, a little rounder, a little thinner, a little curvier here. You don't wake up thinking those things. You don't slave away at the gym at 5:30 in the morning because of your own volition, free will, and self-determination. You decided that you needed to be more of this, less of that. You did not decide that. Setting behind all that is behind me, right? Letting it go. I press toward the mark of the high calling. There is no higher calling than self-determination. It is absolutely critical to the work of liberation, which is the act of communal imagining. What does the fool take with him? Oh, it's so little in there. There's no gender. There's no race. There's no salary. There's no ethnicity. All of those things. There's none of that in there. There's not even room. He's even let go of the clothes that have made you identify him by his class or his gender or his ethnicity. There's nothing even there. We've got the King of Pentacles. I don't know who needs to hear this today. The way that you are being treated at your work, the expectations that are enforced upon you in order to have the basic dignity of food, the basic dignity of feeling safe in your own home, in your workplace. The King of Pentacles is a go out and get it card. When we talk about kings, right? This is not about gender, male or female. This is about entitlement. The right to impact and influence the spaces I occupy. The mere fact of my existence should elicit movement and change and adjustment and adaptation by the people around me. The mere fact that you exist in your skin as a human being means that the places you occupy, the spaces you inhabit, the communities you live in, the block you live on, should change and adapt and adjust because you are there. Anything less than that is erasure. Anything less than that is the violence of being disregarded. See, when we walk into a space, right? Imagine this. Imagine you walk into a room, yet nobody in that room glances in your direction. You walk into any space, your own home, down the street. Let's just say you're in the grocery store. A packed space. Many people in that space, yet not a single person turns towards you and acknowledges you with their gaze. You are a disabled person. This is the analogy. I mean, disabled people for real walk into spaces and people just can't bear to look at the fact because God forbid one day I lose the capacity to have power in capitalism. I lose my adjacency to whiteness and maleness. God forbid I lose that. I can't even bear to look at you. Right? But when I talk about invisibility and erasure, I'm talking about being disregarded, not being considered. See, because it's often invisible to you, right? The fact that you are being disregarded, you don't even notice it. But if it was materialized in a very concrete way that you could see and quantify, it would be the equivalent of you walking into your own house with your own family and nobody even turning to look at you. This is the society that we live in. You are erased. You are invisible. You are disregarded. Now, when you step outside the house in your capitalist labor selling suit, now all of a sudden everybody sees you. When you put on your able-bodied mask because your disabilities and chronic illness are invisible, look at everybody looking at you now. When you code switch to your more tolerable tone of voice, everybody sees you now. When your gender falls squarely into either one of the binaries based on how you look at everybody looking at you now. They can see you clearly now, but you move just a little bit to the right, to the center of non-binariness, and now people are you be homeless, houseless, hungry on the street. Ooh, but if you sell your labor so good that one of our capitalist overlords notices you and gives you a little bit of their power, oh my God, Black excellence. Do you like living like this? Is this enjoyable for you? I don't even know. I don't even know what else to say. When we talk about the King of Pentacles and we talk about entitlement, dignity, and self-respect, I want to read from this post on my blog on Saturn recently in Sidereal Aquarius. The gazes of those who have the power of life and death over us. Let me say this again. The gazes of those who currently have and have had the power of life and death over us comprise the most of this self that we identify with and project outward. When you say I, the self that you're referring to is the one that is made up of all the gazes you've had to internalize to survive. That which makes up the self that you identify with and as me comes from other people in direct proportion to the amount of power they have over you. Tell me you're not going to change the way that you walk and the speed with which you move when you catch the gaze of someone who in your past memory, history, and collective memory is prone to be violent towards you. Tell me you're not going to change and move. Tell me when you have not seen that parent for several months that you're not going to put on the clothes that make you a little bit more like a girl for when your parents see you. Tell me that you're not going to dare speak in the tone of voice that matches the gender that you were assigned, because it would be a mismatch with the gender that you identify with. Tell me that you're not going to change your tone of voice. Why? Your life and death depends on it. Enslavers' power of life and death over the African and indigenous people they kidnapped and tortured. Your parents and other adults' power of life and death over you, their children who have no power of their own. Whiteness's power of life and death over all who must survive its obsession with dominance over all. Capitalism's power of life and death over all who must be fed and housed under its perpetual theft and hoarding. Patriarchy's power of life and death over all who must survive its entitlement to authority, assumed and enforced with violence. We shrink, self-deprecate, minimize into the smallest ball possible in order to survive. See, people always leave out that part. Be authentic. There's no need to be fake. Be your real self. You don't need to be validated to survive. Yeah, you do. You do. The message for today is take up effing space. What does that mean? Taking up space means that you're going to look at me and you're going to see me, you're going to recognize me, and you're going to change because I am here. Whatever way that you've organized society and lived your life, whatever way that has disregarded and ignored and erased me, I'm here to take up space. Taking up space says, look at me. Look at me. Don't you dare ignore me. I'm here. Taking up space means to not shrink inside of the erasure that you've experienced your whole life, to the point that when you walk into a room that's big enough for you, you're hiding in the corner. There is no time like the present to take up space. Open your mouth and acknowledge that you are here. Look in your mirror today. Go look in your mirror. Take your clothes off. Look at your body and apologize to every single part of your body that you have denied acceptance and validation because you've been indoctrinated into a cult that makes you hate yourself. Look into the mirror. Send love to it. Touch it. Look at it. Don't turn away. Don't turn away from it. Don't disregard your own person just because others have disregarded you. Must you see yourself as they see you? Whose vision determines what you see anyway? Thank you for tuning in today. I'm DaynaLN Knuckles, the People's Oracle, the Sidereal Astrology. You just got a delicious chef's kiss taste of divination for liberation. Liberation is the act of communal imagining, when we come together and we imagine, reimagine new and just uses of power, what we value and what we do with what we value, who is a person and who has the right to live with the dignity and respect of being validated and accepted and allowed to take up space. Who do we change for? Who do we step back and make room for? Who do we allow ourselves to be affected by? That is divination for liberation. Make sure you share this video. Make sure you like, make sure you comment, make sure you subscribe. I can't even get my words together. I'm so preliminary today. All right, if you are on Instagram right now, or if you're on Twitter or YouTube, because some of y'all are watching this, I want you to, let's see, it is 3:29. So let's say at 4 p.m. Central, we are going to reconvene here on my Instagram channel with Hakeem Pitts for Altar Call. Oh yes, there's more. Go hydrate, get a drink, use the bathroom, get a snack, rest a little bit, and then come back and join me, okay? We've got things to talk about. We've got some clapping, some praising, some singing, some readings, some word. That's all I got. I love y'all. Happy new moon. I'll see you in a couple weeks. Bye.